All right, let's go ahead and bring it back together here. So where did we notice the law in this law section of Ezekiel that we read this week? Are there any specific examples of the law that stuck out to us?
From 368 to 403.
So the entire thing? Yeah, 368 to 403. It is. It's pretty relentless, isn't it? Yeah. Ezekiel is hard to read, I think. And I think Ezekiel is meant to be offensive. I think the point of Ezekiel is to be offensive. Yeah, and some of the things that are offensive to us as modern readers aren't the things necessarily that would have been offensive to the people in Ezekiel's day, but I think Ezekiel's trying to offend them also. Like, the point here is to raise awareness of the offense that the people have. And Ezekiel's going to be as extreme as possible to get that point across. Yeah.
I'm so glad we have the whole story.
Yes, good.
But in looking at this, if any one of us said the things that were said about the Israelites, we'd be thrown in jail for racism or for hate crime.
Sure, yeah.
And it makes you wonder, well, is God regretting his choice?
Very interesting. So noticing that if we today were saying the sorts of things Ezekiel's saying to his people, we might be arrested or sued for hate crimes or something like that. Yeah. And it makes you wonder, is God regretting his choice? That's an interesting question. Yeah, is God regretting? And is God regretting his choice in what way? Of Judah, now that the remainder of Israel, Judah specifically, or of Jerusalem as the place where God's name dwells, or creation as a whole, right? This is what we get in Genesis 6. Humanity, what is the regret here? I think it's interesting. It doesn't come through in Ezekiel as strongly as it does in Jeremiah. I think that's maybe a style thing, but it's both. But it is here throughout Ezekiel of, even in the midst of the judgment, God laments the necessity of judgment. Mm-hmm. Like, God hates that this is what is happening and needs to happen. Even as Ezekiel's more forceful than Jeremiah, God is the one doing this. Everything, all of this comes from God, according to Ezekiel.
Yeah. Sometimes his anger shows how strong he loves them.
So the anger is maybe evidence of emotional connection, of love, actually. Maybe. Okay. Passion. I heard that, yeah.
I wondered why he was called Son of Man.
Yeah, that's something that's kind of peculiar to Ezekiel, that Ezekiel is almost always addressed in his visions as Son of Man. So Son of Man means basically human. And it's actually, if we're reading this in the NRSV, which is the translation that we typically use, not during this 40-week period, but that we usually use in worship, they translate that as mortal. So they say mortal. I actually prefer the way the NIV does it because, of course, Jesus uses Son of Man as a title in the Gospels. And so even though I don't know what the direct connection, even if there is supposed to be one between Ezekiel and Jesus in that way, in the use of that title, it's nice to be aware of the resonance, I think.
Well, actually, Jesus wasn't a son of man. He was a son of God.
And a son of woman.
Son of mankind.
Yeah.
This fellow was.
That's interesting. So Ezekiel's a son of man in a way that Jesus isn't, because Jesus is not a son of man. He's a son of woman and son of spirit, right? The Holy Spirit, or son of God, I guess. And so the word that is translated man is, I need to double check this and make sure this is true. I'm pretty certain in Ezekiel, in the Hebrew, it's Ben Adam. So it's son of Adam, and the word Adam means human. It can mean humanity, generally, Adam. And so you could read it as son of human. I've even seen translations in the New Testament that translate that title, Son of Man, that Jesus uses, as truly human one, when the truly human one comes. It's a bit of an interpretation, but that's they're trying to get towards this Ben Adam sense. In Daniel, the Son of Man comes up again. There it's in Aramaic. It's a different language, so it's Bar Enosh, but it's the same kind of thing. And usually when Jesus talks about Son of Man, it seems more to be referring to the Son of Man figure that comes up in Daniel more so than this sort of generic address of Son of Man here in Ezekiel. But I think there's some resonances. So yeah, I'm glad that you noticed that.
I was just going to say in the introduction, it talks about the 3 parts.
Yes.
And so this first part, that what we read for today, is just judgment against Israel. And then for next, it'll be the judgments against other nations. It is until the 3rd part that we have the promises.
Yeah.
So there's probably not a lot of gospel in this first.
No, you're right. And we saw this pattern similarly with Isaiah and Jeremiah too, that there's sort of a law section and then a gospel section. So so pointing out, I should repeat for the recording, in the invitation to Ezekiel, there's 3 parts listed, that there's judgment against Israel, judgment against the nations, and then promises of restoration. We read all of part 1 this week, this past week. This coming week we'll read 2 and 3. So it gets much easier. The oracles against the nations are much easier than the oracles against Israel. At least in Ezekiel, they're much less passionate, which is interesting. And then when you get to the promises of restoration, they're almost more extreme than anything we've seen so far. So our text for this Sunday is Ezekiel chapter 37, where there's 2 separate illustrations, we could say, that Ezekiel uses. One is this valley of dry bones that Ezekiel sees in a vision that are restored to life, just impossibility that happens. And then the other one is he takes these 2 sticks and he says, this one is Judah, this one is Israel. Now remember, Israel's been destroyed for like more than a century at this point. These are the 2 sticks, Judah and Israel. I'm going to put them into 1 stick and they will be joined together and never again will they be dissipated. So there's this like incredible promise, impossible promises that Ezekiel is making. That's our text for this morning. But Ezekiel is so extreme on the judgment, but he's also extreme in the promises when you get to that part too. And we have the disadvantage, or maybe advantage, of having read only the judgment parts for this week, but maybe that lets it sink in a different way. Bonnie, yeah.
So on page 371, at the very first paragraph, one who is far away will die of the plague. Is that the exiles? One who is near will fall by the sword. There's surely a call for violence. And anyone who survives and is spared will die of famine. And then later in the chapter, he talks about, make the mark on those who breathe the law.
Oh, yeah.
And so you save those people, but yet...
Yeah. Okay, so can you show me where on I left my book at home that has my underlines and all that?
371, top paragraph.
There it is. One who is far away will die of the plague. One who is near will fall by the sword. Anyone who survives and is spared will die of famine. So this, I think, is specifically referring to the siege and the war against Babylon. Okay. So this is the Babylonians coming in. This is the sword. This is the famine. And then the plague that comes in the midst of these things. So, not that there's a specific plague that we know of, but that's something that happens during siege is, sanitation basically goes away. You don't have access to any of those things. Somewhere in here, he's supposed to cook his food over human excrement. Yeah, a dung fire, and he's doing that because that's what do you have for fuel once all your fuel's out when you're under siege. That's what you default to, and then God sort of lets Ezekiel just use animal dung, which is an improvement, I guess. And the problem is, of course, there's an uncleanness. So Ezekiel's a priest. He's very concerned with this sort of uncleanness. So it's not the dung itself that's offensive to him as so much as the uncleanness because of his priestly background, his priestly position. And not that he's serving as a priest, but that's his training, that's his lineage. Yeah.
That law about thou shalt not commit adultery with the 2 sisters.
Ohola and Oholibah, yeah. A lot of law, yeah. Do not commit adultery. And of course, this is a figure for the first commandment. You shall have no other gods, right, before me. This is the section. There's a couple in here, but this is the section in particular that I warned you about, and was the shock verse that middle school boys like to go to in Ezekiel here. So this very graphic depiction of these 2 sisters, Samaria and Jerusalem. So Samaria, of course, is the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, which at this point has been wiped out by the Assyrians. And this figure of adultery, that going towards these other people, though I was husband to them, right? Earlier, there's another really graphic one of the image of the stillbirth, right? Do you remember the stillborn, and God comes by and says, and speaks, and so that they are planted and grow up, which is a weird mixed metaphor there, but that, this sense of like, you weren't anything in yourself, and I raised you up, I did all this for you, and then you immediately turn to all these other things. And it's, some of the offense here too is it's very, we would call this misogynistic probably, right? A lot of the language here is very anti-woman in a lot of ways.
I was wondering if that had a lot to do with some of the history of, especially like some of the sects that would have women in a very low place. I wonder if Ezekiel had part of that.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. So I think you're talking about the way Ezekiel's been kind of received and used across time throughout history. I think that's certainly true. Yeah. So I think there's certainly a misuse of Ezekiel here, in which it, one of the problems you could say of Ezekiel, and of anything, you can misuse anything, but the problems of it is the way that it's lends itself to being used in a misogynistic way. Yeah. And so, like, the primary problem of the world is adulterous women, right? You kind of come away from Ezekiel, and I don't know, maybe he had some personal experience or something that is relating to this, but he does come across as somebody who's very angry. If I was reading somebody posting this online, I'd be like, okay, here's somebody who really I wouldn't trust around my daughters, right? I just wouldn't, So, yeah, the way that this has been received throughout time. Also, so something we also have to be really careful of as Christians reading the prophets is there has been a tendency, even within our own Lutheran tradition, maybe especially within our Lutheran tradition at certain times, of using the prophetic condemnations of Israel in an anti-Semitic way. Well, that's the Jews' problem, right? The Jews are evil or bad in this way, and not recognizing that this is an insider. This is a Jew speaking to Jews, right? This is an insider speaking to his own people. So would he be accused of a hate crime? I don't know. This is I'm thinking about the way that some of the debate around the Israel-Gaza war is going on, and sometimes you have Jews who are here or in Israel saying, no, we are against this. We think this is overkill, literally, on Israel's side in the response. And it's not because we're against Jews, we're Jews, and so there's a different sense to that than if I say that, where there's a maybe a plausible accusation of anti-Semitism or something there, because I'm not Jewish myself. So Ezekiel is, he is part of Judah. He is speaking to his own people. And so, one, be aware of that. The other thing, too, is it's not that Israel is especially bad compared to the rest of the world. That's not the point that's being made here. God's chosen people are, if they're this bad, how bad are the rest of us? Israel is the best among us, in a sense, right? The right reading for us as Christians is to apply this to ourselves. How are we like them, right? How are they us in another time?
We too are chosen.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Exactly right. So Paul talks about us being grafted in to the God's chosen people as Gentiles, right? So if we are chosen, if we are Israel, not by right, but by adoption, Paul will use words sort of like that. Then we have to recognize that we stand condemned under this. This is not a tool for us to condemn, the Jews or any other group. It's actually being directed against us. No. Good. Bonnie, you said something else too that about the marking of the forehead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a Passover. Odd how.
Oh, so there's a Passover thing there. Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Passover connection, and that there's a little bit of mercy there, a little bit of grace, I guess.
I'm not sure. Well, let's see. What page was that on? Could you point me to that page?
I marked it.
I don't have a good idea.
It was a little bit confusing because, he saves them and then he's like, but you're all going to die anyhow.
Oh, here it is, 375. I just found it. 375. So Ezekiel has this vision of all this idolatry happening in the temple, right? And when you have his, remember, he's not in Jerusalem. He's not literally in the temple seeing this. This is visions that he's having. And so he has, and so in this vision, there are these 6 men who are appointed to execute judgment, as well as a seventh that has a writing kit. He can write. And they come in and they're supposed to appoint judgment. And God says to the one who has the writing, go throughout the city of Jerusalem, put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over all the detestable things that are done in it. And then the other 6 are to go through and kill everyone who doesn't have that mark on their forehead. I don't think I'd call that grace. Certainly not the gospel. And the reason it's not the gospel is because why are they getting this mark?
Because they're grieving and lamenting.
Because they're good, right? They're good. They're not guilty of the other. So this is actually a judgment of the law. This is legal on both sides. This is these ones are innocent. Don't kill them. These ones are guilty. They are to be punished. Both of those are the word of the law. Now, the word of the gospel is a word that comes and says, to those who are guilty, I forgive you, and remits the sin. So we're not there yet, but, well, this morning we will be in worship. The gospel is the word that comes to the bones of these people who have been killed, scattered across the valley, and raises them, right? So the gospel is actually, it's an extra legal, it's an outlaw word, right? It comes in another way.
I look really hard to find some good.
Yes. And my point in saying that is that the law does good. So sometimes we think the law is bad. The law is not bad. The law is frightening. It is harsh. It judges and it condemns because we are condemnable. We do condemnable things. But it is still a good word from God. Even when it's against us sinners, it's still a good word. Not to us, it's not a good word, but it is still God's good work. But it's leading towards God's second word, which is the gospel, which is the one we rely on. Any other gospel that we saw? There are a couple places in here. It does show up periodically, but it is certainly not the focus of this section. Here's something that's close to the gospel. It's moving towards the gospel. It's not there yet. 389. This is the, let's see, is this in the sour grapes section? Again, I don't have my underlines. The text looks so much different when I don't have my underlines. Oh, yeah. So the parents eat sour grapes, children's teeth are set on edge, and there's this whole thing of, this isn't generational punishment. And part of the point here, I think, is actually you're not suffering because your ancestors messed up. You're messing up now. So some of this is intensifying the condemnation. But then further on, like on 389 here, so I'm third from the paragraph on the bottom. Do I take any pleasure in the death of the wicked, declares the sovereign Lord? Rather, am I not pleased when they turn from their ways and live? So there's at least a statement of God's desire, right, to be in good relationship. It's not quite yet the gospel, but you can see maybe an inclination that's going to lead there. God's at least inclined in this way. But then we come to 394, so a few pages later. So there's this kind of long section of retelling the story of Israel, right, which is actually very interesting here. And then I will accept you, this is top of 394, as fragrant incense when I bring you out from the nations and gather you from the countries where you have been scattered. I will be proved holy through you in the sight of the nations. Then you will know that I am the Lord when I bring you into the land of Israel, the land I had sworn with uplifted hand to give to your ancestors. There you will remember your conduct and all the actions by which you have defiled yourselves. And you will loathe yourselves for all the evil you have done. Yet you will know that I am the Lord when I deal with you for my name's sake, and not according to your evil ways and your corrupt practices, you people of Israel, declares the sovereign Lord. So here's the gospel when God deals with Israel for God's name's sake, not according to what they have done. Now, we rely on exactly the same thing. What's the promise that we rely on? That God, on account of Jesus Christ, is merciful to us. Not because of us, but because of who God is, right? And so it's actually God not dealing with us according to our evil practices, our corrupt ways. That's the hope that we rely on. So there's going to be gospel there. Ezekiel's in some ways stronger on that than some others. Yeah.
On the bottom of page 366.
366.
I don't know if this could be associated with gospel or not. It says, you must speak my words to them. I'm kind of seeing that as go out and spread the good news.
So you must speak my words to them. Well, it's both, right? So what kinds of words does Ezekiel have? He has two kinds of words. He has the law, the judgment, the condemnation, even the call to repentance. All that's the law. And he has, eventually, we haven't quite gotten there yet, but the gospel. You dry bones. The Lord will bring spirit on you, will restore you to your land and bring you back together. Yeah, so there's two words here that are being given. So yes, law and gospel are there. That's right.
Okay, I have a couple comments that aren't very deep.
We'll be the judges of that.
I was really surprised on page 367 when they referred to Tel Aviv. Why, Why did I think that was kind of a new city established?
Yeah. So
became a country?
there's a Tel Aviv here. I'm not certain it's the same Tel Aviv. So I'm not sure if it's the same Tel Aviv as modern Tel Aviv. I don't know. Often there are cities that are today have the same names as ancient cities, but they're not actually in the same location anymore. There's a lot of time has passed between now and then. And some of the ancient cities have different names, like the ruins of them are like tell. So a tell is a mound. That's what a tell is. There's these different tells that are named, and most of them are the ruins of cities that have just over time been sort of, there's kind of layers of civilizations on them because people have been there that long. So I don't know for certain that Tel Aviv today is the same Tel Aviv mentioned here, but it might be. I don't remember. Yeah. Well, no, see, I came to the exiles who lived at Tel Aviv near the Kebar River. So this is actually a different Tel Aviv. That's right. So this is in Babylonia. This is not the Tel Aviv that's on the coast of the Mediterranean that we know today. Yeah.
On page 401, they talk about the cooking pot with pieces of meat and bones.
Yeah.
So
what'd you make of that?
Well, at that time, it's like that. There's still flesh on the bones, and it's like the city is still okay, but then they're going to.
Yeah.
It kind of predestines the dry bones.
Oh, nice, good. So, talking on 401, this metaphor that's used of the pot with the meat and the flesh on the bones being boiled, and this is an image for the siege, right? So the city under siege, and I had a little bit of a tricky. In some way, I couldn't tell if this metaphor was necessarily good or bad for the people in it. If it's like, sometimes it's like, oh, there's food here, which is good. And because eventually, after enough time of siege, there's no more meat in that pot. It's just a pot of water and maybe just bones and whatever. It's not a very good stew. But also, it's not good to be the ones in the pot, which they are, sort of being portrayed as. But I like the connection you have to the dry bones coming up. That's where this is leading, and then God's going to do something with that.
Later he said, or I don't know if it's earlier or later, one guy says that he's meat in the pot, and he goes, no, you're not. You're going to be killed by the sword.
Yes, exactly.
He's outside of that.
Yeah, so he's speaking to the certain elders or rulers of Israel, right? Yeah, we're just meat, and we're going to be meat in the pot, and the answer is, no, it's actually worse than that for you. You don't even get to be in the pot. You're going to be out in the fields. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Surprise.
Yeah, surprise.
On page 398. Okay, and he said, I looked and I found no one. So, it's anyone that's righteous. But I'm wondering, because Ezekiel was written, Ezekiel was there at the same time as Daniel. Why didn't he ever bring up Prophet Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
Yeah.
They were good people.
So 398. I looked for someone among them. This is among Jerusalem, specifically, who would build up the wall, stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land, so I would not have to destroy it. Now, I just want to pause. Well, I'll come back to that metaphor, but I found no one. So the question was, what about in the book of Daniel, which talks about Daniel and his three, I'm trying to remember their Hebrew names, but their Babylonian names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That these are the sort of paragons of righteousness in the book of Daniel. Why aren't they mentioned here?
Yeah.
So there's
no one except the prophets.
Yeah, no one. Yeah, not why aren't they even mentioned? So, on one hand, I think in this context of this specifically, this might be a little bit. Well, let me think. So it could be slightly exaggerated, right? That might be part of what this is. It's a little bit exaggerated to make a point. It also could be. So they're looking. I looked for someone specifically who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap, so the gap of the wall, on behalf of the land. So this is somebody who would stand between God and God's wrath in particular and the land, and there was no one who could do that. So it doesn't necessarily mean there's no one who's righteous, but there's no one who could stand in the gap. Now, Moses is the sort of model of this, right? Moses in the wilderness, multiple times, God says, I'm just going to wipe the people out, and Moses intercedes, right? Moses stands in the gap, to use the language here, and God relents in turn. So that metaphor here is very interesting, that there's something about prayer here, right? Prayer understood as interceding before God, of standing in the gap. Now, Hebrews, I don't know that Hebrews ever pulls this metaphor specifically, but the way that Hebrews talks about Jesus as the high priest always interceding for us, right? That Jesus is the one now who is always standing in the gap, that is building up the wall. So there in the New Testament, I don't know that it picks up this metaphor specifically, but it's, we can see that that's the way that Jesus is understood in the New Testament.
Is it like a gatekeeper?
Yeah, maybe like a gatekeeper. Yeah. I kind of think of it as, I don't know, what do I think of it as? So Leviticus, let's think about it this way. So in Leviticus, and not just Leviticus, but a little bit around Leviticus too, there's all this attention paid to the proper way of dealing with a holy God who is in your midst. And there's these sort of layers of protection between the people and this God. And those layers include things like, these are the sorts of things you should eat and not eat. These are the ways you should conduct yourselves. These are the things your priests should do. This is the places you should go and the places you should not go, right? So there's sort of these layers of protection. And I see here something, it's almost like the walls of protection are what have broken down, and the people are now too close to God's holiness, and they're going to be consumed by it. And so something needs to build those back up. Elsewhere, I've not made this connection until right now, so I haven't thought it through, but Ezekiel has that vision we talked about earlier about all the idolatry in the temple, where he digs through the wall of the temple. Maybe that's more the gap that Ezekiel's filling rather than the city walls. I'm not sure. I have to think about that. But
weren't the cities all walled cities?
Not all cities were, but Jerusalem was. Yeah, yeah. So you had walled cities, and then you had other cities that would usually be supported by a walled city. So in times of battle, they would flee to the walled cities. Yeah.
I thought it was quite unique how God was saying, do you see this?
Yeah.
He kept saying that as he took Ezekiel around.
Yeah.
Do you see this?
Yeah, Ezekiel, don't you see this?
Oh,
yeah. And the way that Ezekiel is reporting these is, the point of this is that, can't you all see this? Yeah. Right? The point is Ezekiel's relaying this because really that do you see this, Ezekiel, is kind of meant for the people. Don't you see this? Yeah.
When he gets out of the wall, that hole, he's not supposed to look at the land. Oh.
Yeah. What page was that on? I can't remember that specifically. He gets through the wall and he's not supposed to look at the land, is that what you said?
Yeah.
I don't remember. Yeah. Oh, that's when he's going into exile, right? He digs his way through the wall and he leaves.
Oh, when he packs up.
Yeah, and he's acting out going into exile, I think, at that point. So he's basically fleeing. Ezekiel also has that vision of the presence of the Lord, the wheels and the eyes and the cherub and all those, the karubim in Hebrew, that are leaving the temple, right? So he has this vision, and God's presence goes to the threshold of the temple, and then it departs Jerusalem. And that's when you have, and we heard this more in Jeremiah rather than in Ezekiel, but don't go around saying, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. No, the disaster is going to come on you. And Ezekiel's saying something similar in a much more symbolic way. Like, God's free. God is not confined to this temple. And just because you have the temple among you does not mean you will be protected against the Babylonians. In fact, the prophets are consistently saying, actually, God's at work in these foreigners, these foreign invaders who are who are coming in, though that doesn't excuse their actions as good. They're still being judged for their actions. We noticed that last week, I think. Yeah.
So here's a promise on 386.
Okay.
It says, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I will deal with you as you deserve, because you have despised my oath by breaking the covenant.
Nice.
Yet I will remember the covenant I made with you in the days of your youth, and I will establish an everlasting covenant with you.
Good.
And then later in the paragraph he says, you will remember and be ashamed and never again open your mouth because of your humiliation. Well, anyway, there was something there. And then on the next page, at kind of near the bottom, the last full paragraph, he says, I myself will take a shoot from the very top of the cedar and plant it.
So noticing gospel, good. These are good things to notice. So 386, middle of 386. I will deal with you as you deserve. This is the law, right? Because you have despised my oath by breaking the covenant. Yet I will remember the covenant I made with you in the days of your youth. I will establish an everlasting covenant with you. So this is the law, then the gospel, the second word which follows, right? And then the other part that you pointed out here was on 387, bottom of 387. I myself will take a shoot from the very top of a cedar and plant it. I will break off a tender sprig from its topmost shoots and plant it on a high and lofty mountain. On the mountain heights of Israel I will plant it. It will produce branches and bear fruit and become a splendid cedar. Birds of every kind will nest in it. They will find shelter in the shade of its branches, and all the trees of the forest will know that I, the Lord, bring down the tall tree and make the low tree grow tall. I dry up the green tree. I make the dry tree flourish. I, the Lord, have spoken. I will do it. So, there is a promise for the future here, but it's not one that's going to come from the powerful, or it comes from the top being broken off and planted. There's something very interesting messianically that we can do with this, right? If the Messiah is the inheritor of the promises of the dynasty of David, right? This is the tall cedars. I mean, David builds his house out of cedar. There's a lot of things being listed here. What does God do? God breaks the branch off the top of it, plants it, and that becomes the place where birds of all kinds flock. You know, there's a lot here. There's a lot of things you can see Jesus in this, right? The way that Jesus is an unexpected Messiah who's yet connected to that and becomes the way in which it actually reaches farther than anyone imagined. Yeah.
And I like on 387 where you said bring down the tall tree and make the low tree grow tall.
Yeah.
Also on page 396, the lowly will be exalted and the exalted will be brought low.
Yeah.
That all is in Matthew 23:12.
Okay, yeah, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So bringing the high to the low and the low to the high. So on 396 as well as where we just were talking on 387. And we see this in the New Testament. One of the most famous places we see it actually is in Luke, the Song of Mary, right? So when Mary has the Magnificat, as we call it, you know, he pulls the high and lofty down from their thrones. He exalts the lowly, right? And so this is a consistent theme across the Scripture, really. Yeah.
On 298 in that second paragraph, it says her prophets whitewash these deeds.
Yeah, isn't that nice?
That whitewash, it's the opposite of being washed white.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I like that. So on 398, there's the image of prophets whitewashing a weak wall, right? And the opposite of whitewash is washing white. So washing white would be clearing away the grime and getting to the true goodness underneath. Whitewashing is covering up what's bad with something that looks nice. Jesus uses the term of whitewashed tombs when he's talking to the Pharisees in one of the Gospels, maybe more than one. Yeah. Do you want to? Yeah, Chris.
So on 396, since we're kind of in that area, right in the middle, there's a promise of Jesus. It says, "The crown will not be restored until he to whom it rightfully belongs shall come to him. I will give it."
Yeah. Where on the page is that? I'm having fun finding it.
It's in the third paragraph down, kind of the end of that.
The crown will not be restored until he to whom it rightfully belongs shall come. To him I will give it. Yeah. So this becomes one of the promises of Messiah. On 396, sorry, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. You're right. Mm-hmm. And this is part of the hope that at Jesus' time is still being held on to, that one will come. Because when Jesus is born, it's Herod who has that crown, which he has gotten from Rome. He's gone and appealed to Rome. He's not fully Jewish. He's an Idumean, and there's some issues with that from the people's perspective. So, even at Jesus' time, they're like, okay, well, we have a king of the Jews. We have a king of Judah, or Judea as it's called at the time. But it's not, even they know, this is not the one. He's not the one, nor are his sons who come after him. Okay, I want to go back actually for a second to 386. There was something really interesting that I noticed here that I hadn't noticed before. So this is part of the, this is not the Ohola and Oholiba sisters one, but this is another sisters metaphor between Samaria, which is the capital of the northern kingdom, Jerusalem, and Sodom. Do you notice this? The three sisters, Samaria, Jerusalem, and Sodom. So now Sodom is an image of judgment, right? So Sodom hasn't existed for a very long time. In fact, the place of the Sodom story is the Dead Sea. I mean, that's where the Dead Sea is. And so the Sodom is almost like it becomes sort of like an image, a metaphor of judgment. And because you can look at this dead place. Nothing lives in the Dead Sea. That's why it's called the Dead Sea. It's too salty, right? And that's Sodom, right? So Sodom is sort of the city that nobody has any memory of, but that's what it was. And then Samaria, which they don't have direct memory of, but they have closer memory. It's been a century or more. And they know of the city. It still exists, kind of, but not really like it did. And then them. So these three sisters, and it says, well, what you've done is worse than what any of them did. You're the worst of the three, you Samaria and Sodom. Notice the sin of Sodom. The sin of Sodom, according to this, is that they oppressed the poor. That's interesting. That's what Ezekiel says. This is the sin of your sister Sodom. They did not care for the orphan, but oppressed the fatherless, the widow, and the sojourner. Or I can't remember what the language it uses in here specifically. That's on page 385, page before here. This was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters would be the towns surrounding it. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. So, arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned, did not help the poor and needy. It's a little closer to home than maybe we'd like it to, but there it is. But there's this promise at the end of this section. So I will deal with you as you deserve, right? So this is the law section. But I will remember the covenant that I made with you. Then you will remember, once you've received mercy, you will remember your ways, and you'll be ashamed of the way you held yourself over Samaria. We're the righteous ones. They were punished because they were bad, but we're good. Sodom, they were punished because they're bad, but we're good. You'll be embarrassed of that. That will embarrass you once this mercy has come to you. And you will receive your sisters, both who are older than you, those who are older than you and those who are younger. I think it's Sodom, the younger sister, I can't remember, in the metaphor. I will give them to you as daughters, but not on the basis of my covenant with you. I will establish my covenant with you. You will know that I am the Lord. Then when I make atonement for you, you will remember and you will be ashamed and never again open your mouth because of your humiliation. And that's a sense of you will remember and you'll be ashamed of the way you held yourself up over the others. You won't be proud anymore. But you'll be received as sisters with Sodom of all places, like the very image of judgment. And Sodom will be received back to you. That's a remarkable promise, actually. That's, we talked a little bit about in Jeremiah when the valley of Ben Hinnom, the Gehenna, talks about being holy to the Lord. This is on the level of that. That this is like the place of judgment, and God says, even this, I have power to restore, right? And will restore. Yeah.
So I always thought of Samaria as an area, but there's a town, Samaria?
So the Samaria so at this time, the northern kingdom of Israel, the capital moves around a bit because there's a lot of dynasties and infighting in that kingdom. But Samaria is where it ends up, and it is for the longest period. So at the time that the capital is destroyed, the city of Samaria is the capital of Israel. So when we get to the time of Jesus, that area is now called Samaria, but it's named after that city. Which was the capital. And so the Samaritans are the people who live in that region of Samaria. So, because at the time of Jesus, we have the Roman provinces, or I think there's other names, but the Romans have divided up into administrative districts. And you have Judea, you have Samaria, you have Galilee, are the three major ones that are dealt with in the New Testament. And so the Samaritans are those who live in Samaria, but it comes from that city, which was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just a funny thought is,
Yeah, go ahead.
not, but it says that then you will know that I am the Lord. I looked it up. It says it occurs 70 times in Ezekiel.
70 times, then you will know that I am the Lord. 70 times in Ezekiel. Yeah, I believe that.
He's
Yeah.
grinding it into.
So what is so even throughout this judgment section, what is God's purpose? God is interested in being known as God, that I am the Lord, that you will know
then
me.
You will know that I am.
Yeah, and sometimes I can't remember where I saw this. Let's see if I don't think I wrote it down in my notes. No, I don't think I did. But there's at least one time, and maybe a couple times, where you will be totally destroyed, and then you will know that I am the Lord. It's like, well, who will know? But we're in Ezekiel, where we're going to get to some dry bones that are going to know that I am the Lord when they've been pulled up out of your graves, O you people. Right? So there's this sense that this is God's purpose. And it even transcends, what looks like a complete end in death to us is not an end to God. Even this can now serve the purpose of you will know. Yeah. So there's something about God's, insistence on dealing with these people, but all peoples really, for the sake of being known as God. So there's a theme that we've been seeing throughout the prophets here of, what's the thing that God seems most angry about? It's idolatry primarily. Although there's other things here too. So what was the sin of Sodom? The sin of Sodom was that they were haughty and overfed, right? So God cares about those things too.
Pure disobedience.
Yeah, so it's disobedience. So I think the way to understand this, and even the way the Ten Commandments are laid out, I think this is the way this is all of this is the fruit of idolatry. So the base sin is putting your trust in something other than God. And that leads to everything else. Everything else grows from that root. And so part of the reason God's so concerned about idolatry isn't just that God's sort of got a big head or something like that, but that this is the thing that leads to everything else. Luther, in teaching the Ten Commandments, will say, if the first commandment is fulfilled, all of the commandments are fulfilled. But when it's not fulfilled, all of them are unfulfilled. Like everything is summed up in a way in this first commandment. And that's what the prophets are interested in again and again is, the heart, we might say, right? Or the source of trust or the place of trust. Where is your hope placed? So something similar to this, actually, this transitions pretty well into something. So go to page 393. So this is in the middle of that section. This is Ezekiel chapter 20. That's retelling the story of Israel. Over time and really emphasizing the unfaithfulness of the people, to a way that's even a little bit exaggerated in the sense that like it's intentionally omitting anything that's good or it's portraying them in the worst light possible, which again is something to be careful. Don't use this as Israel is really bad. This is you, right? So in the middle of this, there's this section here. One second. Top of 393. So earlier, I gave them laws I led them, so I'm on 392, sorry, I'm jumping around. I don't have my notes here, so I'm trying to find it. Therefore, I led them out of Egypt, brought them into the wilderness. I gave them my decrees, made known to them my laws, by which the person who obeys them will live. I gave them my Sabbaths as a sign between us, so they would know that I, the Lord, made them holy. Now, it's interesting. God makes them holy. It's not their doing that makes them holy. Now, in 393, there's this sort of inversion of this. They had rejected my decrees, desecrated my Sabbaths. Their eyes lusted after their parents' idols, so I gave them other statutes that were not good, laws through which they could not live. I defiled them through their gifts, the sacrifices of their firstborn, that I might fill them with horror, so that they might know that I am the Lord. So there's this good law and bad law that are both given by God, which is very strange here in Ezekiel. And I was reading and trying to just sort of piece this together. And I came across this quote in Luther, one of Luther's works. And he's actually commenting on Isaiah 1:11, where it says, what to me is the multitude of your sacrifices? I detest your whole burnt offering. You remember we've come across this a couple times. But he's referring to Isaiah 1 specifically. But this is what Luther says. According to the judgment of the flesh, which does not understand the Holy Spirit, these words are indeed pure blasphemies. The prophet agrees with David in Psalms 40 and 50, and with others who reject the sacrifices offered for the purpose of appeasing God, such as Jeremiah 7 or Ezekiel 20:25. That's our verse here. Though the offering of sacrifices was the supreme work that was commanded by God through Moses. So, in a way, the question is being raised, how can it be that God says, I reject these things, or calls them bad, evil here, and yet that's like what Moses is, the books of Moses are almost primarily about, is about how proper sacrifices and all that. Like, if this is what God wants, then why is God saying, now I don't want this? So this is how Luther responds to this. This is our doctrine of faith. God is not appeased by our works and merits. He neither needs them nor wants them in order that we may have glory. But he himself, who has regard for nothing else than his own goodness, has the glory. Therefore, whoever wants to appease God by his own merits is worse than Sodom, namely an idolater. Consequently, those people are reproached here in this way. He's talking about Isaiah, but we could say this in Ezekiel too, because they do not understand the law. Now he says, when the godly bring sacrifices, they testify they believe God. By this faith they are justified. When the ungodly do it, they disregard faith and consider sacrifice to be the supreme worship of God. That is, they despise the kernel and admire the husk. They take the cob of corn and they say, well, the corn itself doesn't matter, it's the husk that matters. Right? It's the wrapper. So the sacrifice is the wrapper. The faith is the thing inside it. To be sure, sacrifices are not evil. But if on their account I wanted to boast that I am a righteous child of God, then I would be misusing them. It is like this. If I wanted to boast that I am an heir of heaven because of the bright eye God gave me, I would be misusing an otherwise good eye and would be making it only an idol and making a liar of God who says that he will be gracious for his own sake, not for the sake of anything else whatever. So this section of there's good laws and evil laws, Luther at least interprets this as being, they started to put their trust in the laws. And by putting their trust in the laws, instead of being the good law given, become idols. Now, it's not that the laws are not good anymore, although Ezekiel's a little stronger here. He talks about child sacrifice and such, and I'm not sure exactly how to understand that, especially, Brian, your question that you brought up, because it's, again, nor did it ever enter my mind. Well, I don't know how this interacts with that, so that's something I don't have a resolved answer on. But there is a way in which that we take these good things, and if they become the object of our trust, gold and silver, good things, they become the object of our trust, now they are idols and actually, we could say damnable, use the strongest word there, right? Like there's actually something, they've taken us captive. Jesus, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and throw it away. Luther, I'm sure, has that in mind as he uses this. If I say this good eye this is my righteousness before God, I'm taking what is a good gift of God and I'm turning it into an idol. I'm turning it into something that pulls me entirely away from God. I just want to read the last sentence here. In the end, the one who is a true Christian is the one who is neither presumptuous in their works, nor despairs in their sins, even though they avoid sin and do good work. Nevertheless, the one who is a true Christian has their hope fixed on God alone, not on any creature or work. So there's a way in which what God is after with all of this is, I want you to trust in me and me only, so that you may know, right, that I am the Lord. I am the one who has done this. That there's this desire for, we call it, or a lot of American context, we call it personal relationship. And that's true. It's a little weak, I think, right? But what we're talking about is trust. Trusting the one. God wants to be our God and not for us to be captive to any other God. And all of these other sins come out of that one sin. That's the root which everything else flows out of. You get that wrong, then it's going to lead to all sorts of other problems. And if you get that right, then the other ones, they don't completely go away. We're not perfect, and we're not perfect in our faith either. But that's what God is after here. And so that's a consistent message of Ezekiel, really, although Ezekiel says it in all these shocking ways. We only have a couple minutes. Any other comments or questions?
I really like the description of the cherubim.
You like the description of the cherubim? Yeah.
So, what is the function of the cherubim?
Yeah, good. What's the function of the cherubim? I think I shared with us the cherubim are not something that's unique to Israel. This is sort of a local Middle East image that's around. They're essentially the guards of the gods. They're the divine protectors in a way. Maybe the foot soldiers of the gods. So if you think about the images, sort of, especially Ezekiel's images of a king being carried on a litter, right? And so you've got the sort of the escort of soldiers that accompany that king wherever they go. This is the Secret Service agents walking alongside the limo. That's what the cherubs kind of are. So they're imposing, they're big, they're beast-like. Ezekiel's have 4 faces, which I don't know that there's many images of that. And what he's getting at with that, I can't fully fill in for you. They're full of eyes. Every part of their body is full of eyes, which to me I think means, you can't sneak up on them. That's sort of the way I interpret that, but there might be more there than I know.
I see it that God sees everything.
God sees everything, yeah. So there's a way in which they're sort of, in some ways they're almost like standing in for like aspects of God, right? Almost in a way here. Like they're almost symbols of these aspects of it. Notice God is never really described. There's sort of something undescribable above them, right? There's this dome and there's the jewels and there's gleaming metals, but it's like, it's not the guy with the long white beard or something like that, right? So it's that's sort of God's presence. And Ezekiel's has this very symbolic way of seeing that. But yeah, so the cherubs, so my Old Testament professor would say that you have seraphim, which are what Isaiah sees flying in the temple with the 6 wings. And then the cherubs, the cherubim, and he would say, well, the seraphim are sort of like the Apache attack helicopters, and the cherubim are like the M1 Abrams tanks that are going along. So that was the way he would, but the idea is that they're sort of images of power. They're images of authority, of glory. And he actually interpreted the Isaiah vision where God is, the hem of God's robe fills the temple up, and the seraphim are flying around going, holy, 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 as them actually responding in fear, almost of like, they're the ones who are supposed to be the images of strength, and they're completely dwarfed by this God, by the Lord. That's the way he interpreted that. I think it's a possible interpretation. Yeah.
What is, he talks about the cherubim twice, the first page and then again on 178, but he talks about then the cherubim with the wheels beside them. That's the second time he talks about
the wheels. Yeah.
The wheels.
Well, the UFOs, obviously. Okay. No, I'm just saying. Yeah. So what are the wheels that he sees? I think the wheels. Yeah. Did you have a thought on that, Cheryl?
I looked up and it said the wheels were the symbol of God's presence.
Yeah. So they're a symbol of God's presence. I think that they're leaning into a mobility of God's presence. That's part of Ezekiel's point here. Like when he leaves the temple, precisely, yeah. And they go every direction at once. They don't have to turn. Like there's sort of an omni-mobility with them. Yeah.
That's the beginning and the end.
There's an infinity there, a beginning and the end. Yeah, the circle is a symbol of infinity. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of symbolism here. Ezekiel is so symbolic in these visions, and I don't even know the half of it. And I'm not even sure there's one interpretation necessarily. Sometimes you use symbols because there's multiple interpretations. They might apply at different times in different ways. Okay. We're at the end of our time, so the rest of Ezekiel is much easier to read than the part that we have read. So that's there's some very interesting things in there. We're going to hear judgments against other nations, which, in some ways feel sort of standard now that we've read a lot of these. They don't feel that much different from what we read in Isaiah or Obadiah just before this, or Jeremiah, when we have these sort of oracles against other nations. And yeah, I don't know what to take of that. If God's not as personally invested, or maybe they're just not the people that Ezekiel's speaking to specifically. Like Ezekiel's audience, he's harsher with them. And then he sort of has these, but he doesn't need to be as harsh because, he doesn't want these people to get a big head in front of him. I don't know. But then he gets into the promises of restoration, including some pretty detailed descriptions of religious functions, temple functions being restored, which remember Ezekiel's a priest, and that sort of comes through near the end of Ezekiel, I find, in his descriptions of the restoration, that, there's an orderliness that comes with the restoration. So, okay, I'm going to close this in prayer and then send us out. Good and gracious God, I thank you for the gift of your word to us. I thank you for the minds that you have given us and the resources you've given us and the community that you've given us in which we can wrestle and wonder with these things. Help us to root our faith in you. No, better, root our faith in you. Take away from us every idol which would get between you and us, and make us to trust perfectly in you. so that we may rest in your promises. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.